Paula, but because of the increasing number of COVID cases and everything with the Delta variant, out of an abundance of caution, we switched this to a webinar format. So we appreciate you joining us this morning. Today we have Dr. Danny Klittich with us from Redox. Redox for the past several years has been donating all of the fertilizer products we use at Pine Tree Ranch. If you haven't been by the ranch recently, I would recommend sometime to, if you're passing by Santa Paula, take a look. The ranch is looking fantastic. The trees have really performed well since we've been on the Redox program, and we really appreciate Redox donating that material to us for the past several years, and we hope to continue that relationship. So Danny's going to talk to you today about the fall fertility program and what's been going on at Pine Tree. If you pre-registered for the webinar, you may have received 2 emails from me this morning. The first one had an incorrect attachment on it, and it may not have come through. The second one should have a PDF attachment, and that is outlining the full fertilizer program that we've been implementing at Pine Tree this season. If you did not pre-register and you did not receive that email, this presentation is being recorded, and the recording and a copy of that handout will be available. I'll commit to next Monday at the latest on the CAC Grower website. And then also in the next Green Sheet email newsletter, we will have a little write-up about it and links to the handout and the video of the presentation. So with that, it looks like you're ready to go, Danny. So I'll turn it over to you. Real quick, sorry. If you are participating and you have any questions, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little Q&A box. If you can just type your questions in there. And at the end of the presentation, we will go through those, and Danny will have a chance to go through and answer all those questions.
Sounds good to me. Okay, let me just reorganize some pop-up windows here, and we'll get started. So thanks, Tim, for the intro. So I'm excited. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of different fertility topics today. This is kind of the second round of talking fertility with CAC here, and last time was in person at Pine Tree. So change it up a little bit from last time. We're going to take a little bit different tack. So instead of kind of reviewing every nutrient like we did last time, we're going to really focus in on the primary inputs in avocados that we like to focus on, and the majority of our budget is spent on in avocado production fertility. So I'm Dr. Danny Klittich. I'm an agronomist with Redox. I have a PhD from UC Davis, and I cover the California coast for Redox. So I do a lot of consulting in avocados, as well as every other crop we grow on the coast: leafy greens, strawberries, citrus, wine grapes, so on and so forth, all the way down to cherimoyas. So yeah, so I get up and down the coast a lot. I cover pretty much, and I take calls from San Diego too. So I cover the whole coast. Today's topics, we'll do a little introduction on who is Redox if you're not familiar. Then we'll talk about fertility planning. As the title of the talk implies, we're going to talk time, source, rate, and place, and how those are important when we're considering making our best use of our fertility inputs and the best use of our dollars. And then we're going to talk about the primary avocado nutrients, focusing mostly on nitrogen, potassium, zinc, calcium, and carbon. We're going to support those with some trial results that we've used, and then we'll follow that up with a brief run through of the Pine Tree Ranch, fertility program, and then we'll finish it off with questions, FAQ, and I have some FAQs prepared for in case you're too shy to ask the questions. So who's Redox? Redox is a bionutrient company that focuses on sustainable plant nutrition. So we produce a whole bunch of over 25 different nutritional products that we market in ag as well as in turf and the sports markets. We also, so I think that I like this summation of Redox. Our purpose is really, we exist to create passion and excitement in growing plants. And I hope today we get a little bit more of the passion and excitement of growing plants, really drill down on some details, give you some reminders or some new background information on how we're growing those plants. A lot of us got into agriculture because we like to grow plants. So I hope we get to further that today. Avocados are a wonderful crop that can be extremely profitable when grown in the right time, right place, and the right way. They're absolutely beautiful. Look at that nice spring flush with bloom coming. There's some fruit going to be ready to pick there in a year and a half. So I think that's the part of avocados that we all like to think about. Unfortunately, there's a lot of avocado production that actually is this, and that's the paperwork part of it. So we're going to focus on the fertility planning part today. I know you guys have a lot of other paperwork that you have the pleasure of doing, but today's going to be the fertilizer planning, which is going to be coming up here in the next couple months, reassessing where we're at for this year, where we want to go for next year, what's our yield looking like, where we want to push, where we want to pull in the program, and how we're going to do that. So let's focus in on that fertility. Now, I did want to start here. So I asked Agrex, this was last year's number, but I asked Agrex, which is one of our distributors, how many fertility products they have in their warehouse right now. And they had 486 fertility products on the shelf. So that's a pretty broad menu, I guess, to choose from. All of those may have their time and place, but there's definitely some redundancy there. And then there's also a lot of choices there, which can be very overwhelming if you're not familiar. So the other thing that complicates this is avocados are complicated, right? So here's a great graphic I pulled from, this is actually from the New Zealand Avocado Association. Yeah, the New Zealand Avocado Growers Association and Industry Council. And I love this because it really highlights, this is a 2-year cycle. Obviously all the months are backwards because this is a New Zealand deal, but avocados are doing a lot of different things at a lot of different times. Being a subtropical plant, they perform weird things here in our Mediterranean climates. And it's just something to keep in mind that as the phenology of the tree changes, what it's going through, its needs change, and the soil or our management practices might not provide everything that tree needs at that point. And that in turn leads to yield loss. So that's our goal today, is to maximize the tree's ability to achieve yield. There's lots of different ways that programs are out there, are written. We're going to go through some of these today. You'll see there on the right, that's the standard fertility program. And we'll talk about the Pine Tree Ranch fertility program here in a little bit. So what's the goal of fertilizing? Why do we do it? To drive yield. That's number one. We want size, quality, and pounds, right? That's what we grow avocados for. And that's how we get paid on avocados. So we need to drive yield. Fertilization is an investment in the crop. It's like buying stock, and then you put it into the crop, and then the trees take that fertilizer and the water and the sunlight and the air and all the other things that the tree has access to, and they turn it into fruit, and then we are able to profit on those fruit. Soil applied fertilizers during periods of high nutrient demand are very important. Foliar applied fertilizers during periods of high nutrient demand that occur when soil conditions restrict nutrient uptake by the roots. And I would also add to that when the tree is receptive to those foliar applied fertilizers, which is a very small window in most avocado orchards. And then a properly timed fertilizer application is critical. I like this quote from Dr. Lovett. The goal is to increase fruit size, fruit set, fruit quality, and grower profit, even when the tree is not deficient by standard tissue analysis. We're going to talk a little bit about tissue analysis and how that comes into the equation here, because many people use that in their planning, and I think that it's an important tool in your management decision process, but sometimes it's over relied upon, and we're going to talk about the nuances of that here in just a minute. So let's talk about fertility planning. Let's just the framework we're going to use for fertility planning. A good place to start, if you haven't already, is with soil and water testing. So it's important to know what you're working with. The soil and water tests are not that expensive. You don't need to do them very often, and they really can be good. If you're not comfortable going through them, find one of your consultant that you work with that is comfortable with them, and go through them just to get an outline of kind of what you've got, because you're not going to change your soil unless you buy more ground somewhere else. So this is kind of the baseline of what you're working with. And then it's important to know what the rule book is for your soil, right? So when I look at a soil test, I'm just going to go through some of the basic things that we like to look at. it immediately will identify possible deficiencies. If something is completely missing, you got to put it in, right? So in this case, potassium is extremely low on this soil test. This is a screen grab out of our soils app that Redox has. So that's where that came from. But so the potassium is missing, and we'll just know, okay, well, we don't have any potassium in our soil. Well, we just need to make sure we fertilize with potassium, or we have very low potassium, I should say. So no problem. We now know that potassium is we already knew that potassium was an important input. And now we know that our soil doesn't have any potassium. So we just need to make sure that we have potassium consistently going out, because it's likely that our trees will consistently have potassium deficiency. Similarly, you can also look at things like water movement. In this case, high magnesium base saturation percentage indicates tight soils, hard soils, soils that don't take water well, soils that don't leach well. So if we have a high magnesium base saturation, we know that. I'm not going to go through all the little nuances in soil tests, because that would be a 2-hour presentation in itself, but I just want to highlight that soil tests are important to gain insight into what you're working with. Okay. Well, what's going on here? Why aren't we changing? There we go. Okay. So what's the 4Rs? So the 4Rs is something that has been kicking around in agriculture for several decades now. The Agronomy Society really puts a lot of work into this and really pushes this right time, right source, right rate, right place. So that's the 4Rs of fertility. And I wanted to go through each one of those, and it seems really simple, but each one of those is very important. And if it's not done correctly, you can waste your money. So that's really what this is about, is making sure that when you put out an investment, when you put out, you're spending money to buy fertilizer, and when you put it out in the ground, you want to get return on that investment. So this goal really is, if we can get the right time, source, rate in place, we'll end up with a better return on investment. So let's just start with right time, because that's the first on the list. So right time really refers to two things. We want it to be there when the crop needs it. Right. And like we stated earlier, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, the crop has changing needs over time. There's lots of different tables out there that show what's going on in the trees when, and every year is a little different, right? You're going to have, the year will shift by 4 or 5 weeks, either direction, kind of around an industry kind of accepted average that we know, okay, well, usually we set fruit in May. Well, this year it was June 1st, and the year before that it was April, but usually it's around May. So, so there's these things that shift depending on the weather that year, and that's something that we need to keep track of, and then supporting the needs of the tree at that point to maximize that phenological stage. And we'll go through that in a minute. The other thing on right time, because a lot of guys will just go, well, I'll just put everything out right now and it'll be there later. Not all fertility products can stick around. Even slow release fertilizers don't really stick around that long in a highly available form. So this is just a graphic here of a soil colloid with potassium, and I thought I'd use potassium as an example here. Potassium exists in the soil in three distinct states. We have a solution potassium, which we can see here in the water here, and here's our root. This is the potassium that the plant can readily access. We have exchangeable potassium. This is the potassium that the plant might be able to access. That's just sitting on the soil colloid that's just holding on. Then we have this fixed potassium. That's potassium that is just part of the mineralogy of the soil. And the fun thing about potassium is it will move out of the soil mineralogy and into solution, but it will also move back if you put too much. And this is true for many things. The soil is a great buffer. If you put out too much of something, it'll start sucking it up and make it disappear. There's millions and millions of pounds of soil out there in our effective root zone in avocados, and that's a lot of buffering capacity, which is a saving grace in some cases if you overdo it on accident, and it's also a detriment in some cases if you actually intend for something to stick around. So we've seen, one of the older practices was to spread dry SOP or something like that, or a granular pre-blended product in winter, right? We'll spread it in December, January. We'll let the rains put it in the ground, and we'll have fertilizer all year long. And the concept there is good. You put out, there's more potassium in that soil than there was before you made that application. The problem, however, is the potassium's not plant available. So you might have added 300 pounds of potassium with that application, but pretty much 98% of that 300 pounds is going to be stuck back in the soil in a form that the tree can't access within 2 months, 3 months, maybe at the most, depending on soil temperatures. So, so right time is essential. So we want, the bottom line is we want to match our application timing to tree need. How do we know what tree need is? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So that's the first part. So we got to get it in there at the right time, the right source. So like we talked about earlier, there's almost an unlimited number of different fertility products on the market that you can choose from to use on your ranch. Some just general guidelines to keep in mind when you're picking your fertility input. The first is solubility. You can buy really, really cheap fertilizer. For example, calcium sulfate anhydride is super cheap. You can get them to just bring you truckloads for free almost, right? That's a ton of calcium that you'll get out of that. Unfortunately, none of that calcium is bioavailable. It has almost zero solubility. So it's pretty much ground up drywall. So it's cheap, but it's not soluble. So you're not really gaining anything from it. So you need to, so the first and most important here is solubility. So when you pick an input, it needs to be soluble. There's something to be said for a low solubility that's going to release over time, but it needs to be in a time frame that you care about and not geologic time, which I think is less usable by us in agriculture. So solubility is key. Cation and anion. You need most fertilizers, almost all fertilizers are a salt as defined by chemistry. They have an anion and a cation that's combined by an ionic bond. So that's potassium thiosulfate is a salt, calcium nitrate is a salt, ammonium nitrate is a salt. So there's an anion and a cation, a positively charged part of that and a negatively charged part of that. Many times we're looking for that positive charge, potassium, zinc, calcium, on down the list. Most of our micronutrients, they're all cations. Now, you can't just buy the cation though. You get an anion along for the ride. And if you're doing large applications of fertility inputs, you can end up building up a lot of extra anion, especially if you're stacking multiple anion sources. So for example, if you're using potassium sulfate and calcium sulfate and zinc sulfate, you'll start stacking a lot of sulfate into your soil, and that can start causing its own problems. We actually had a grape grower last year that they were really excited about the usability of thiosulfate products and the cost. They used 10 gallons of KTS, 10 gallons of CATS, and 10 gallons of magnesium thiosulfate, which was 30 gallons of thiosulfate based materials. And they did all that in about a week and a half. That was too much. It burned their roots, and they ended up with soft grapes, and they ended up having the worst quality they'd had in 10 years after that decision. So just something to keep in mind of it. There's too much, right? There's a too much, and the cation anion product that you're buying is important. Then if there's cost, right? We all care about the cost of the source, right? There's some phenomenal products on the market that are just too expensive. But they're just, they'd be great to be able to use that for everything, but they're just too expensive. So your cost per unit has something you need to figure. Your cost per acre. Different products have different per acre rates. It's not necessarily that you always need 35 units of potassium. It's that you need the crop response you're paying for. So cost per acre is very important. And then your cost per application. I've seen a lot of people fall into the trap of, well, this product's only 50 cents a pound. It's dirt cheap. This is great. I don't want to spend $6 or $7 a gallon. That's too much. I can get 50 cents a pound over here, or 25 cents a pound. That's awesome. Well, but it's a dry product. You have to spread it, and you have to put out 300 pounds. So you're doing $150 worth of product plus a spreading cost. So you're actually probably ending up spending more, even though you're getting a cheaper product that's probably lower in solubility. So there's these trade-offs that just need to be considered on multiple levels. And then of course, bioavailability kind of goes hand in hand with the solubility and also the rate at which it ties up in the soil, as we talked about that right time concept. So if it ties up in the ground, it's not bioavailable anymore. It's kind of gone backwards on the solubility on this from a solubility standpoint. And it's not what you want. You want the roots to be able to grab it. Okay. So right rate. right rate seems like it should be simple, but of course nothing ever is. The right rate is going to come down to what product you're using and what your need is and what your timing is. So you can see here, here's some lamb hass. This block picked out about 35,000 pounds a couple of years ago. This block needs more fertilizer than other blocks. If you set a crop that's 6,000 pounds, probably doesn't need as much fertilizer as a crop that has 30,000 pounds. So adjusting your rate appropriately, using a product that allows you to maintain that input while not burning your roots or oversalting your ground or things like that, and also achieve the size you want. That's one of the big problems with an overset crop, is that if you don't have enough fertility inputs, you end up with a bunch of little 60s, and that makes you a lot less money than having a bunch of 48s. So it's a lot of pounds lost, just because the trees didn't have the ability to pull up enough potassium, or didn't have enough potassium up. So make sure rates track what your potential yield is. I think I see a lot of people that just fertilize every year exactly the same regardless, and that can get them into trouble. Not only are you wasting money on the low years, you're losing money on the high yield years by not hitting your size brackets. Okay, and then right place. Right place is extremely important. I see this a lot with dry fertilizer. This was an exceptional case. All that white stuff around the bottom of the tree there, that's all granular that they threw out there, and then they decided they would run the sprinklers to try and wash it away, and that just made the situation worse. And they pretty much defoliated this whole, trying to save money using a granular product that looked like it would be cheaper, but ended up losing money because it put it out improperly in the wrong spot. So they just stacked it all up around the bottom of the tree instead of spreading it out evenly. And the other problem is, obviously we irrigate our avocados. And if your fertility product is not in that wetting pattern of that sprinkler, then it's not going to work until winter. And we really don't need a whole lot of soil applied fertility in winter when it starts raining. So liquid injected fertilizer for avocados is, in my opinion, a must. I think there's very minimal utility of granular products within the avocado production system. As maybe some spot fertilization type things and things like that, but pretty much all your fertility inputs should be going out through your sprinklers, because that wetting pattern where your sprinklers hit the ground is where your avocado roots are. So your most efficient way to deliver nutrition to your tree is through your sprinklers, because the roots are sitting there just waiting to take it up. So that's the right place. Okay, right source, right time, right rate, right place. Okay, so just an easy framework checklist there of, is my management option that I'm implementing today for fertility, is it going to achieve my goals? Right, so just kind of, you can go through those four, and if you have any questions on any one of those, talk to your consultant, give me a call. We can go over it and make sure that it's going to achieve the goal you have. Okay. Last thing I wanted to put into this section and in planning is tissue tests. Tissue tests are an industry standard to pull tissues in fall and see what they say. Generally, if you're going with fruit growers, this is the tissue result you get back. There's a couple more. I think there's another page, but this is pretty much what you get. There's green bars, there's yellow bars, there's red bars. Most people look at this and go, "Oh, I was low in zinc. I guess that zinc product didn't work." Or potassium was low. I guess that didn't work. So I'd like to push back on that a little bit and say tissue tests are a report card of how the program that you implemented in that year performed with the crop and the weather that you had. So I've seen tissue tests come back where the zinc is low, but they've had the largest crop they've ever had on those trees. And then the question is, well, did my zinc input not work, or was I just didn't have enough zinc out there? And so there's these things that come up when we look at it, and now we know, okay, well, the zinc program I ran this year with my 25,000 pound crop was insufficient to maintain the nutrient levels in my trees that I want. So we need to, now we have a frame of reference of, okay, I know on this soil with that irrigation on those trees that when I put out 65 pounds of zinc sulfate. That didn't get me what I needed. Okay, then we need to look at the tissue, say I didn't get it. Then we go, when the pack outs come, we go look at our pack out and say, yeah, that pack out wasn't quite what I wanted, or, pack out was fine, maybe it was okay. So we need to have a little bit more zinc in there because we need the trees to be sufficient going into the next year, but maybe we achieved what we needed in sizing. So this is just part of the overall decision-making process of where we're at, and should be taken into account with what's your orchard look like, what's your tissue look like, and what's your pack out look like, and are you happy with each one of those? So, and those all should inform on each other to make sure that you can make a management plan that makes sense. Okay. Okay, I got a question that I totally missed a couple minutes ago here. This is on 300-acre orchard. How do you decide how many and where to take soil samples? So that's a great question for soil samples, and the answer is there's a lot of different answers. I'll tell you my preferred way to approach this is if you have a 300-acre orchard, you look at how many different irrigation sets you have and where those are and where you'd like those to be, I guess. And each one of those irrigation sets would be your management block. So if you have an area that you can manage differently or that you want to manage differently, then take a sample from each one of those areas that you can manage individually. If you're going to manage the whole 300 acres the same, then pulling only a couple samples across the whole ranch is probably fine. And then you'll just kind of take the average and say, here I am. I know that this is my general soil that I'm dealing with, and we're just going to go from there. If you are going to manage to the block, pull samples at each block. You can walk an X pattern across the whole block, make a sample that's the average of that block, and you can manage to that sample. If you have weird spots on your ranch that you're like, hey, that's really, really sandy right here, it's always helpful to kind of have an idea of what each one of those weird soils is. If you can't isolate that within your irrigation system or within your application, within the way you apply your fertilizer, it's less useful and just more interesting, I guess, to have that data. And maybe there's something you can do in those individual sections. Maybe there's not, depending on how you manage your block. So that's I guess that's how I've approached it. There's a lot of labs out there that'll grid sample your whole orchard and give you per acre soil analysis. I haven't found anything that utilizes that information to any meaningful way that I see return on investment for having all that extra data. I think that's, in a lot of cases, that's over-analysis paralysis is what you get out of having 300 soil samples show up on your inbox, and then you're supposed to look at them on a spreadsheet and figure out what to do. It makes sense when you have variable rate fertilizer applications in potatoes or something like that, where you just plug that data into your John Deere and it spits out different fertilizer in different patches to support the crop differently. 100% think that's really cool and useful. Don't see that happening in avocados right now. So that's soil samples, and I think that was a timely question. Thank you. So that's basic planning. How are we going to approach it? Background information, things like that. So from here, I want to jump into actual plant nutrition. So if you really want to jump down the rabbit hole of what plant nutrients do, get this book. It's the standard textbook for pretty much every plant nutrition class. It's, I don't know, $160, like a standard textbook. It's about 2 inches thick, and it goes through everything you could possibly want to know about plant nutrients, what they do, where they come from, what they do in the plant, all the different enzymes they work with. It summarizes all the research, so on and so forth. So Marshner's, they've done a phenomenal job over the years, and this has been the standard text. You can see that's the 3rd edition. And if you're ever like, man, boron, I just don't get boron, this book has like 8 pages on boron you can read, and it's great. So if you want to do the deep dive on plant nutrition, this will totally get you the fundamentals of plants and mineral nutrition. Now, this book does absolutely nothing for practical choosing products, making decisions in the field, but it'll get you a good basic understanding of plants and how nutrients interact with plants. So it's not a practical text, but if you like that type of thing, it's kind of fun to go in and see all the different enzymes that zinc interacts with. It's an interesting book. So that's enough about that. So basic plant nutrition, we got macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur. Those are the generally accepted macronutrients. If you went to school more than 10 years ago, even when I went to school, there was 3 macronutrients. They added 3 more because they exist in really high amounts in plants. They're generally, we don't put them out like macronutrients, but in many cases, the plant benefits from putting them out like macronutrients. Here are micronutrients. Now, the difference between a micronutrient and a macronutrient is macronutrients, there's just the plant has a whole lot more of it than micronutrients. It has probably an order of magnitude less of these minerals in their tissue than the macronutrients. They're all equally important. If you don't have any iron, you're going to have a very unhappy plant. That's why it's an essential plant nutrient. Now, I'm not going to read all the micros, but you can see them there. Rarely do some of these show up as issues in avocados: magnesium, sulfur, sodium, chloride, molybdenum, copper. Those ones almost never we talk about them in a deficiency standpoint. Oh, there's also these other nutrients that sometimes show up. These are cobalt, nickel, and silicon. Some weird plants like cobalt and nickel. They are needed in very, very small amounts, but generally our soils have enough residual. And then silicon is one that is not classified as a plant essential nutrient, but is classified as a plant beneficial nutrient. We might talk about that a little today if you'd like. So as I was saying though, the nutrients that avocados generally are going to need and that you will see return on investment from putting into your field are nitrogen, potassium, calcium, zinc, boron as well during bloom, manganese occasionally, but those first 4 are the ones that will really, really benefit you. And then carbon, which isn't listed on this, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now that of course is paired with this phenology of a Haas avocado tree in that things change throughout the season and we need to make sure we address those as we go. So let's jump in here to our first nutrient. So nitrogen is our first input, our first plant nutrient. Nitrogen is incredibly important for in every plant cell. It's a basic component of all amino acids and many other compounds within the plant. Second to carbon, nitrogen is required in the largest amount. Plants obviously get most of their carbon out of the air. And then it's a key element: DNA, components of amino acids, chlorophyll molecule, synthesis of proteins for growth and yield. And generally, we associate nitrogen inputs with vegetative growth. If we put, for example, if you put 10 to 15 gallons of UN32 on your avocado orchard, it will grow. You will get within 4 weeks, you'll start seeing tip push, and it'll push, it'll grow. It's not necessarily good, it's just a fact. We put extra nitrate out there, the plant will take it up. Plants are pretty much every plant evolutionarily is nitrogen limited. So they all have a mechanism where if you put out nitrogen, they're going to grab as much of it as they can and they're going to hoard it. So if we put out too much nitrogen, the plant thinks that it's in a candy store and it will grab all the nitrogen it can and it will have nowhere to put it. So where do plants store nutrients? They store nutrients in their leaves and in their roots. Nitrogen's pretty much stored in the leaves. They will push a bunch of new vegetative growth. That vegetative growth will then store all that extra nitrate. The problem, however, is we don't always want a bunch of vegetative growth. And when the tree is preferentially developing vegetative growth, it will not be putting the other nutrients it needs to grow leaves in other places. For example, there's a classic, I don't know, old wives' tale, but a classic wisdom in avocado production of when the tree is blooming, don't do your nitrogen applications. And one of the reasons this holds true is that if you do a 10 or 15 gallon shot of UN32 during the same timing as your peak fruit set, the tree will see all that nitrate and say, screw these flowers, I'm going to grow some leaves because I need all this nitrate for later. And it will grow a bunch of leaves. And then instead of putting resources into floral development and early fruit development, it'll actually preferentially grow leaves. So, and and then when it preferentially grows leaves, it doesn't the tree doesn't invest into the flowers, and then your fruit fall off because they didn't get the resources they need. So there's some timings where it's great to push vegetative growth. For example, June or July, it's a good time. We need vegetative growth to cover up our fruit. We don't need a bunch of vegetative growth during our bloom. However, that being said, flowers do need nitrogen. So a little bit of nitrogen during bloom is good. Too much is not good. So there's a fine line that we walk. Early nitrogen is very important. Carol Lovett's done a lot of work with that. If you're not familiar, Carol Lovett she's now emeritus with University of Riverside, I believe. And she did a lot of research in subtropical citrus and avocados, and did a lot of the work, kind of the base work on plant nutrition and hormones and things like that, especially in avocados. So you'll hear her name come up several times, kind of referring to some of the seminal papers that she put together. So yeah, so you need nitrogen early for that early floral push. A lot of that yellowing that you see during bloom is nitrogen deficiency. So a little bit is good, just don't overshoot it. So that's I think that's all I'm going to say about nitrogen. Potassium. So potassium is probably our number one expenditure in avocado fertility. It's a very important nutrient. It's important in nutrient transport, well as solute and water movement from the plant, stomatal control, transport of sugars, cofactor for a ton of enzymes, protein regulation, increased resistance to stress. If you're potassium deficient, your tree will have lots of problems. Generally, we associate potassium with fruit sizing. So you can see in the top picture there, we have small fruit. Those fruit were that was a picture taken, I want to say in May or something like that. So that's not a size class that we're really happy about in May. We'll probably be able to size those out and maybe get some small 48s out of them if we're lucky. But this is an indication if you have small fruit in May or June, you were probably potassium deficient in the preceding summer while these fruit were sizing out, or there could be other problems. Small fruit are not necessarily potassium. It could be a watering issue, could be zinc, could be a lot of other things. So, but if everything else looks good to you, then your potassium might have been lacking. This can be probably one of the higher culprits on the list of small fruit. Also, if you have small leaves, that's an okay size leaf that I'm holding there. But if you have small leaves, that's also an indication of possible potassium issues, but also, once again, watering can be a big part of that as well. Potassium need by the plant kind of follows this rapid fruit sizing stage. So we're talking mid to late summer is when we see a large increase in potassium content in the fruit, as well as springtime when we also have rapid fruit sizing. So the orchards that were surveyed here, most of the fruit sizing happened from March to June of the second year of after the winter. Personally, I'd rather see these two flipped and have pickable size fruit in February or March, so that you can play the markets better on size inputs, and I think that's doable. However, just keep in mind that when you are pushing fruit size, whenever that is, if you're pushing fruit size in November or whatever, potassium is one of your major inputs that fruit is assimilating and pulling out of the tree. Potassium is really important for the stomatal opening and closing. So if you're low in potassium because the crop is pulling all the potassium out of the tree, your tree will be less responsive to heat and other stresses, and will be more likely to succumb to damage under heat stress or other stress factors due to that low potassium in the leaf and the crop not being able to physiologically deal with stress. Okay, so this is the first spot. I want to introduce one of the Redox products that we've utilized at Pine Tree Ranch. This is DiCap. DiCap increases plant respiration. It's a 03150, so very high in potassium. It increases plant respiration and antioxidant production through the soluble carbon compounds that are also contained within this product, improves stomatal conductance, and then obviously it's going to help with phosphorus and potassium nutrition. The goal of this product is it's built to have maximum delivery of potassium and phosphorus to the plant, and pair that with biostimulant components that are within the product to help the plant deal with stress. So that has been our go-to potassium input for Pine Tree Ranch over the last several years. We've done several trials with a parallel product called Platinum, which also has a high K component and has a lot of the same components as DiCap. We've run a couple trials, including Pine Tree Ranch. Oh, see, this is an old slide set. I apologize, but we did this with several growers on the California coast, where instead of other potassium inputs, notably KTS programs, all we ran were Redox, Platinum, and DiCap. And where we ended up was we had similar tissue analysis come back, and we had similar yields come back. The yield data just came in a couple of weeks ago. We haven't been able to get it in here yet. But so what we were able to see is generally with these products, we run a lot less units of K. However, we run a more efficient unit of K, so we're able to have better uptake and better crop response. And in addition to that, because we're pairing it with the ability to help the plant deal with stress better, we're reducing our yield loss from stress by using these products. So DiCap has been a powerful tool in avocados to help push along our potassium program. Okay, the next nutrient is zinc. So zinc is important in enzyme structure components, ribosomal structure, proteins, lipid synthesis, carbohydrate metabolism, oxygen synthesis, and then cell membrane integrity. Zinc deficiency, classically, not necessarily in avocados, but just classically within plants, looks like small internode length and small leaves. In avocados, we see zinc deficiency showing up. You'll see some intervenochlorosis, but you also see a lot of small round fruit. So if you have a bunch of golf balls hanging on your tree, you have a zinc problem. It's really very notable if you walk out in the orchard and you see a lot of zinc deficiency. I see this a lot in organic orchards for some reason, that you go out there and they're just perfectly round fruit. And perfectly round fruit, you can actually get a baseball size perfectly round fruit. They're hard to do, but you can get there, which still sizes out okay. But generally you're looking at more, you're staying in that 60 size class, and you're losing dollars on every single one of those that doesn't size out. So the fix for this is to put out zinc. And when we have zinc put out, what we see is that those fruit tend to elongate better, and we have size accumulation goes up. So the overall importance of zinc within avocado production is very high, and application even in sufficient locations is still, when it shows up sufficient, it still seems to show benefit, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So Redox inputs that we've been using is triplex zinc. It's a dry product. It's got an organic and a conventional label. We have it's 25% zinc, enhances zinc uptake with its amino acid chelation technology that we'll talk about in a little bit, and it improves zinc movement within the plant as well as in the soil. And then it contains a soluble carbon package, which is also very helpful. It has good solubility and really good plant activity. Now, I have a lot of discussions around zinc. Like I said, it's one of those, it's usually the next one that comes up in the conversation between, okay, well, here's nitrogen, here's potassium, I've been doing that, now what? And zinc is usually the next best use of your dollar. The the question, however, is, well, my tissue tests say I'm okay with zinc, so do I need to put it out? Am I going to see a benefit? So we did a trial 2 years ago looking at if we put out extra triplex zinc, so we put out 1.5 pounds a month, which our standard rate would be more like a pound a month. Can we push those pounds in size? So this was done actually by my brother when he was at Cal Poly San Luis and a cooperating grower up in Goleta. And we did 1.4 pounds of triplex zinc, April through October, were applied on top of their standard UN32 KTS program. And the orchard traditionally had been sufficient in zinc. It hadn't really indicated any need for it. There wasn't round fruit. There wasn't any problems like that. So it's a good block to kind of test. What's this? If we have a luxury application of zinc, do we get our money back? Is it worth it? Is it a waste of money? What happens? So bottom line, after a year of application and then waiting several months for it to get picked, we ended up with this. We got an 8% bump on the triplex zinc treated blocks. So we had 2 blocks with zinc and 2 blocks without. And that 8% bump was about a 690% return on investment with the compared to the triplex zinc program. So I think the extra zinc program cost $120 an acre, which is a lot in a lot, in a lot of budgets. However, you can see that returned a significant amount of more fruit, and you can see those yields aren't terrible yields, right? We're at 11,000 versus 11,500. So sorry, 10.5 versus 11.5. So you got an extra 1,000 pounds or so out of that deal. The more interesting part that I thought was really cool was this, that we see here that the blue bars is the control section, and the orange bars here is the ones treated with zinc. And you see that there's a size shift. All of our larger size classes, 32s, 36s, and 40s, all got more fruit, and we saw less of the 48s. So a nice overall increase there, and that also shift really benefited the overall profitability of those blocks. Triplex zinc relies on this amino acid chelation. It's a little different than the traditional EDTA or other synthetic chelates in that it holds the zinc metal ion with amino acids. There's also fulvic and humic acids that we utilize for that chelation process. The benefit there being it's an effective product foliarly or soil applied. There's low burn potential, and the whole molecule, the chelated zinc with the amino acids on there, is utilized by the plant for energy. So when the plant takes up that zinc, it comes with amino acids that the plant can use or other things. So that's very, you're getting more than just zinc with the triplex product line, or just more than the metal ion. So you're getting extra energy as well from the amino acid and other soluble carbon content that's in that product. Okay, can you give me your breakdown percentage of N applications in the chat? Give me your breakdown percent of N applications. I think you're talking about percentages over the year, and I'm going to come back to that one at the end if you don't mind. So we'll get to that one. Calcium is the next one. So calcium is critical in cell wall strength, plant structure, secondary messenger, and a lot of different processes. It inactivates and activates enzymes that break down cell walls, and it reduces susceptibility to disease and increases fruit firmness. So calcium really is fruit quality and true resilience. You can see here's what we don't like seeing in June, which is fruit falling off the tree. A lot of this can be limited by calcium deposition during bloom and early fruit development. The importance of calcium: if we don't have calcium in the system, we end up with a weak cell wall that doesn't hold in moisture well. It won't stand up to stress and movement, and so on and so forth. With the addition of calcium, we end up with a stronger cell wall and a better cuticle. So calcium uptake by the fruit is really in that early fruit sizing. So you can see here that this fruit really pulls up from July, which is when the crop was set in this study, for that first couple months into October. So that's when our calcium content in the fruit is gaining, and that is when we see the most benefit from our calcium, is from bloom through this early rapid fruit sizing. The redox inputs that we've utilized have been very successful in avocados have been mainstay calcium, and we have an organic and a conventional. Once again, on this product, it's a 20% calcium, improves cell wall structure, increases fruit firmness and fruit quality, and it helps reduce drop. We did a trial looking at the combination of mainstay calcium with a calcium nitrate based program, because there, once again, a question in the field that needed an answer was, I'm already doing CN9, why do I need to do mainstay calcium? Is there any difference there? Is that going to help me? I'm not happy with where my calcium numbers are on my tissues, but I'm already kind of maxed out on calcium nitrate. Where am I going to get? Is mainstay calcium actually going to make a difference, or is it something else that's causing that problem? So that's what we did. We looked at what happens when we apply mainstay calcium at a rate of about 1.75 gallons per acre. over 6 weeks through the micro sprinklers during bloom time, where do we end up at the end of the season? So this was done in Ventura County. We just looked at a simple tissue analysis for calcium with and without the additional mainstay calcium. And we ended up with a notable increase of about 22% increase in calcium content. And they also saw more consistent calcium numbers across the blocks that it had calcium. So that's that standard error bar, the black bars there kind of indicate when those are bigger, that means there's more variability, whereas the smaller interval there would be a smaller interval there would be a more consistent result. So that's calcium. So calcium plays an important role in root growth as well. So I want to throw this as kind of a transition. So if we don't have good calcium nutrition, we're not going to have great root growth. But the other thing that plays a really big role in root growth is our soluble carbon. So roots are really important obviously for nutrient uptake, for holding the tree down. Avocados have a very unique root system within agriculture in that most of their active feeder roots are in the top 8 inches of the soil surface. And they have structural roots that go deeper, but they don't have a lot of feeder roots down deep, as opposed to something like a lemon that or a citrus tree. You're going to have feeder roots that are down, they might be down 3 feet, that are pulling up nutrition, or even further, grapes even further. So it's very important to maintain a robust root system right underneath that leaf mulch. And that is really that's what's making yield. So if you don't have a healthy mat of roots underneath your leaf mulch, your trees most likely will not perform. So trying to maintain that root system, maintain that rhizosphere in a way that allows the roots to proliferate and take up nutrition and find nutrition in that mulch is very important. Now, having healthy soil biology for avocado roots is absolutely essential. Avocados are a weird crop. We all know that. Grow avocados, they're weird. But one of the reasons that they are challenging is because they have this really unique root system, and they actually don't produce what we think of as what are known as root hairs. So root hairs are the microscopic roots that higher plants develop, and those actually help to mine nutrition out of the soil. Avocados don't have those. What they rely on is the fungal communities in that mulch layer and in that topsoil to help bring the nutrients into the root. The avocado version of soil mining and soil pH modification and soil root hair production is leaf mulch. So they drop leaves, those decompose, those build organic matter in the soil. That organic matter is the home for our microbes, and when the microbes proliferate, they release nutrients and the roots are able to pull it up. So that's how avocados do it, as opposed to other plants that kind of rely on other mechanisms. So one of the tactics in avocados that has been extremely useful has been the addition of soluble carbon, and this is the humic acid component of many avocado programs. So when we put in soluble carbon, we push that soil microbiology along. We give it the carbon that it needs in the size class that it needs to break down. And as that is metabolized, more nutrition is released in the soil, and that leads to crop response that we're looking for. Soluble carbon in the soil also acts in and of itself to help pull and stabilize nutrients, and that is a very beneficial act in and of itself. H85 has been Redox's flagship humic acid product. It's a 5% potassium in liquid plus a 12% humic component. It's unique in the market in that it also includes a long chain carbon component, which really helps build the soil fungal communities. Excuse me. And those soil fungal communities really help improve soil microbial diversity and soil health. It's also very good mixed with our nitrogen inputs. It can help maintain that nitrogen in the root zone longer by helping it cycle through the microbial community and stay available, as opposed to leaching through our system. It has a diverse diverse soluble carbon fractions. So we feed multiple different levels of that cell microbial community, from the bacteria that feed on fulvic acid and very small carbon compounds, all the way up to our more macro micro flora and fauna that feed on larger carbon compounds, notably our fungal communities that really help with soil structure and bringing nutrients to the roots. Our organic formulation of this product is a dry product, and if you're familiar with, we also used to have a dry H85 as well. The organic is 50% humic acid and 18% potassium. It's because it's dry, the numbers are bigger because you don't have a carrying agent in there. So that's great. I think a lot of people still think that soluble carbon is a waste of money. I think there's plenty of evidence in the market and in the field that the addition of soluble carbon into fertility programs has paid huge dividends in avocados, especially in sandy low organic matter soils. Is the exact opposite thing of what avocado roots like. They like to grow there because they're well drained, but the nutritional availability there is very challenging for an avocado, and the addition of soluble carbon has been very beneficial. We ran a trial several years ago on H85 improving rooting in avocados. This was done down in Mexico, and they looked at H85 versus a competitive humic acid product, and did 10 pounds active ingredient per acre versus another product that was 10 pounds per acre active ingredient. This is a fairly high rate for H85, but this could be something that would be done in like a soil builder program or something like that. And is a standard practice in Mexico for their avocado production. And what they found was that, you can see here, we've got untreated is red, blue is the competitive humic acid, and then H85 is the orange once again. And you can see that active bacteria populations, we got pretty similar reactions between the two humic acid inputs, but then the fungal populations really had a big bump with the inclusion of that. And we attribute that to the inclusion of the long chain carbon, which really helps build which really is what fungi populations like. They like breaking down larger carbon complexes, which aren't necessarily usually included in humic acid products for a number of reasons. And this has been really beneficial there. Another thing we measured in this trial was root mass, and we did see an increase in root volume, or root mass, sorry, with the addition of H85 to the grower standard program in this trial. So that's what I had for soluble carbon and plant nutrients. I know I got a couple questions that came in here. What is the timing for H85 applications? H85 is going to go out. Generally, we pair it with our nitrogen inputs. And I know there was another question here. Can you give me your breakdown percent of nitrogen applications? I believe in most cases, we'll do, in a mature block, we'll do a third to a half. There's two ways to do it. Some people do a third before bloom, a third after bloom, and a third in summer, late summer. And some others will do more like an eighth before bloom, so a really light shot then, and then more do like a half in June and a half in late summer. You'll see in this program that was sent out to you, or that you'll be getting on Monday, that we're going to go through here in a moment, that we've kind of opted for the June timing and then the late summer timing. A lot of this also has to do with your water. Many of our water sources have high nitrogen numbers. Pine Tree Ranch is one of those that has high nitrogen in the water. And so it doesn't take a whole lot of applied nitrogen that you're going to bring onto the property other than what's coming through your water. So in those cases, you might end up putting out 80% of your nitrogen in some cases just through your irrigation. In those cases, you have no control over when you have those higher percent. You don't really have a higher percent breakdown that you can control. So that has been very, very important. So, and then I've got here, that's the H85. I already did that. And then what would you think is a good packout report example? Hit the wrong button. Would you think is a good packout report example? 85% of 48s and larger with 9% 60s and smaller, I'd say that's pretty good. Yeah, that's good. I think the important thing is to try to improve, right? So there's two ways to improve on the profitability. There's more pounds produced and there's better sizing. So if you produce lots of pounds of tiny fruit, that's great, but it'd be better if you produce lots of pounds of bigger fruit. If you produce a few pounds of really big fruit, well, that'd be better to be more pounds and have good size class. So I think that's always the goal, right? Is to have that, I'd say, yeah, 85% or higher, 48s and larger, and then push and then keep pushing that number as much as you can. I always forget to hit this answer live button. Sorry, on my side, it says answer live. I'm supposed to click that and then it'll record it. And then I'm supposed to hit done, but I never do it. And then there was a question here on the zinc table that seemed to have some stuff backwards. So we can go back and look at that here in a little bit. So I'm going to switch screens here. And I wanted to go through this Pine Tree Ranch Avocado Fertility Program just quickly and just kind of highlight the strategies of each month. I'm not going to go deep on the products. We already talked about the kind of the notable products on this program, and just kind of go through it and what we're targeting and why and when. So this is a higher end program, I would say. So let me stop sharing this screen, and then I will start sharing the other screen, which is this one. And we're just going to go through that. So Pine Tree Ranch here is an 11-acre block in Santa Paula. If you haven't been to it, Tim's got all kinds of fun projects going on out there, from different planting densities to different pruning metrics to, I don't know, he's got all kinds of fun stuff. But we get to do the fertilizer, which is fun. So Agrex Redox has partnered with Agrex to provide that service, and that has been going very well. The basic management practices at Pine Tree Ranch is managed by Sierra Pacific at this point, and it gets watered once a week on Thursdays for between 8 to 18 hours, depending on the season and the water need. And we fertilize it once a month. So that's our the high overview of the management practices. I don't know what sprinklers they have out there. So they are sprinklers, though. It's not drip. It's on micro sprinklers or fan jets. I'm not very good on irrigation technology. So, but we start fertilizing when it warms up. So if it's warm in March for early bloom and not raining, so like this year, we started fertilizing in March, and our goal in March is early bloom development. So we've got a little bit of nitrogen going out. You can see 3 gallons of AN20. We've opted for AN20 in most of this program, just due to more control of the nitrogen release with AN20 over UN32, and it being an easier product to blend with a lot of these things. But you could swap this out for units for UN32 in many of these cases as well. And when it's cold, such as March in the soils, we really want to have a higher nitrate number, whereas the urea might take a few extra days to a week or two to break down. So we're just looking for kind of a nice little pop of nitrogen. So we've gone with AN20 here in early spring. A little bit of zinc for sizing fruit, and then a lot of root building options here. We're going to help build the soil, push it along. This platinum product has potassium in it, but also has a bunch of humic acid. So that's what we're doing here. So our strategy: push the fruit a little bit that are on there, build the soil, build the root system. Oh, that's not ideal for this. Where do we go? Single page. There we go. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so April, very similar, except for in April, we're starting to have some bloom development. We're starting to see some. This might be a cauliflower stage type timing. We're going to start putting in the calcium at this point, and we're going to continue to push the humics and the root growth with platinum. Mainstay calcium comes in. We're switching to a more complete micro package at this point during bloom, so we make sure we pick up any possible deficiencies that might be lingering in the background with those cold soils that aren't being able to take up, so that we can support that bloom development. And we're also doubling up on our boron, because boron is extremely important in pollination. So you can see it's not very much money. This is actually probably a low rate. They have some boron in the water there, This next year, actually, we're probably going to up this boron number to kind of help with set. Boron's important with pollen tube elongation and pollination. If you don't have boron, you won't have fruit. So it's something that I recommend for most places, even in places where boron toxicity has been attributed to them. Early season boron can still be beneficial because boron will actually leaches out of systems, especially if you have acidic water or heavy rainfall years. Boron can leave your system over winter, and you need it in spring. Bloom spray. If we do a bloom spray, we opt for some low urea, some extra calcium and silicon for mainstay SI, and then Supreme Flowable is our combination of micronutrients and potassium, zinc, and biostimulants that helps with nitrogen metabolism. And we'll put that in there to really help that tree feel like it has excessive resources to help it set as much fruit as possible. One of the things I think that's important to remember is that the reason the tree wants to make fruit is that it wants to make seeds. So if we can make it make seeds, then it needs to make fruit. So, and if it wants to make seeds, it needs to have resources. So the tree's actively making decisions on how many resources it has. And so if we can, I won't say trick it, but we can confirm that it has a lot of resources by providing them during those decision-making processes, then we can hopefully set more fruit onto those trees. The problem there is if the tree at some point feels deficient in the future, it'll start dropping them. So we got to have them set to grow them for next year. So that's where we start. And then May fertility, very similar to the previous month. We do continue our calcium applications, continue our PK and soil building here with platinum, continue our light rated nitrogen, 4 gallons AN20, very light, and then continued on our micros, so very similar to the previous month. Thrip sprays comes in sometime here between now and June. We're going to do a similar to our, sorry, it's not really similar. For this thrip spray, we usually recommend putting in mainstay SI. That's going to help toughen up the leaf, toughen up the cuticle on the fruit, as well as provide additional calcium and silicon to the system. We're going to have dicap here. Our PK source is going to help with sizing and stress. And then we're going to additionally put in more micronutrients here to make sure that we have sufficient early season micronutrients during that fruit sizing. Generally, these thrip sprays are done towards the end of bloom, and all of these are kind of starting out that rapid fruit sizing. These can all be very important. Micro has a bunch of zinc in it, which zinc is important at that point. June. So June is usually either the end of flower or the most important part of flower, depending on that year. So this is when we kind of shift from a flower centric program to a fruit sizing program. Fruit sizing program, we have a light rate calcium, we have a higher rate potassium, a higher rate of zinc. June is when we want to push vegetative growth to cover. So we have a higher rate of nitrogen. And then we come in here again with this second Root RX application. This is going to help with root stress and helping grow stronger root systems. This is a biostimulant. We talked about that 2 years ago. I have a question here on, can we follow this for strawberries too? Strawberries are a little different than avocados in that they fruit all the time. So the strategies are similar, but the timings may be a little bit different. And then I've got an anonymous attendee here that says, if you use your June rec as an example, which of the 5 recommended products can be combined in a single tank mix? How would you recommend the manual application of these 5 products in a given month? So let's go back to June here. So everything in here except mainstay calcium can be combined. You need to acidify the tank a little bit and they'll be tank stable. If you have agitation, all 5 of these products can be put in and injected. These are all tank mixed in an injection rig when they come to the ranch and are injected together. So this is injected all at once. One of the nice things here with these Redox products, this mainstay calcium and dicap. So the dicap has phosphate in it. However, we can combine these two because of the complexing the microencapsulation technology that we use on the calcium makes it so it won't tie up with the phosphate. So we end up with a very stable tank mix here. It does need agitation because the mainstay calcium will have a tendency to settle. And so if you have agitation in the tank, it can all be put out in one go. Oh, I messed this up again. So you can put them all out in one application with agitation, I guess, is the answer for this June trial, or this June application. Okay. July, same thing, sizing fruit, zinc, potassium, a little bit of calcium, heat stress, so lots of dicap here. This has served us very well, having this high rate application of dicap in July and again in August to help with heat stress. You can see same thing, dicap, calcium, zinc. September, same thing. We've backed off on the calcium and gone more for our late fall. So we're still sizing fruit. So potassium, zinc. But then we've started to bring in our nitrogen again to help with late fall vegetative growth, which is what we're going to need for our budwood development for the following year. Like I said, these nitrogen rates are slightly lower because we have a lot of nitrogen coming in with our water here. And October, we come back with a more complete application. We bring back this platinum product to help build roots. As things cool down in October, we generally have a lot more flush out of the trees. They get happier when they're not dealing with 100-degree heat every day over the summer. And so we bring back in the mainstay calcium. That microflowable shows up instead of the zinc because we're trying to get some additional micronutrients in there. We have a tendency at Pine Tree Ranch to see some weird micronutrient deficiencies in fall from the heavy fruit load that's sizing. We've seen manganese pop up a couple times on some tissue tests we've run. So I've opted here for a more complete micro package as opposed to just a zinc input. Once again, nitrogen, and then we have our third shot of Redox to help build roots. And this whole strategy here, we did 3 half-gallon shots throughout the year of Redox to help build root systems and help the tree deal with stress. This has been very beneficial. And then lastly, you won't see a lot of people fertilizing into November, but if the tree is flushing, if you are irrigating, then the crop will respond to fertility inputs. Things are happening in the crop. The only caveat to that I would say is when it gets cold, sometimes it's warm in November. I know we have people on here from San Diego, and it's always beautiful in San Diego. So I don't know why you'd stop fertilizing if the soils are an okay temperature and things are growing, then it can be very beneficial. The only time it's not is right before rain applications. I think it's a waste of time and money to put out fertility or not rain applications, but rainfall, large rain events. You're going to wash things through your system. That's not advisable. And then we're going to also, if you have, a 2-week sunny period in the middle of June or middle of January, sometimes the trees start moving, but it's hard to get fertility responses in soils when they're that cold in the middle of January. So if they are cold, some of you are on south facing sandy soils with, good temperatures, and you might have growth all year long, and then it's going to be a challenge. Question here. Oh, I'm going to click the button this time so I can answer it live. Okay. Question is, do you prefer dicap as a soil or foliar application? We've used it in both ways and seen benefit both in avocados. We've generally used it in summer as a soil application and very happy with it. So that has been good. Foliar, we talked a little bit about foliars and avocados. You need to have receptive tissue when you do a foliar application, and summer growth on summer foliage on avocados generally is pretty hardened off and not very receptive to foliar applications. However, if you have new red growth or nice new soft growth out there from a flush, such as in fall or around that thrip spray timing or early spring, those tissues are receptive to foliars, and that can be a great way if you are running a rig through or would like to run a rig through, that you can put dicap in there. It can be a very useful way to get things in. Foliars are really nice because you can short circuit the soil. Soils are complicated. Getting nutrition into the plant through the soil is hard because there's a lot of chemistry going on. There's a lot less chemistry going on in your spray tank. So that's a good way to go. Do you have a problem with growers thinking Redox is too expensive? Wow, that's one of my questions that I have in the FAQ section. So you can see here, the prices are all listed. These are our MSRP prices. And you can see this platinum product's $55 a gallon, right? So that's as opposed to, if you haven't looked at pricing lately, KTS is like $6 or $7 a gallon for 25% potassium. Redox, we get sticker shock all the time from Redox, right? So you look at a Redox product and dicap's 10, what is it? Here, let's go back up to dicap here because that's a a standard product here. So DICAP's 1086. So as opposed to $6 for KTS. But the DICAP products, you can see that their per acre application cost, $32 per acre at this standard application rate, is still, that's only 5 gallons of KTS, which I would say is our biggest competitor for potassium inputs in avocados. And with the DICAP product, you end up getting some phosphate, which is helpful. You also get a bunch of biostimulant and soluble carbon, which is more helpful. So I would say that we do get pushback on expense, but these products can be used in a standard production budget and be just as effective as other inputs. They're priced competitively within the market for the return on investment that we see. And I think, and we're very comfortable with that. So a lot of the times we'll use a cost comparison swap out strategy, where if you're spending $65 on KTS that month, put $65 into DICAP and you'll be happy. So, so absolutely. Please do a session on strawberries too. I'm from India. Will be great if there's anything on strawberries. Okay, yeah, well, we'll I've got some content on strawberries, I think, on my LinkedIn page, and if you don't, reach out to me later and we can talk strawberries. Okay, thank you. Solar foliar wrap. Okay, so that was that. Okay, where were we here? So that was in November, right? So that's November, end of the year. We'll shut them down, a little more micros, a little more root flush, and that's fine. So that was the whole program. You can see our total program cost here. This is an $800 program. However, I think this is an economical program for the yield numbers that we get out of that and our goals that we have at Pine Tree Ranch. This program pays for itself many times over. So, so that's this program. You have this in your inbox if you'd like to look at it more closely. And I'm always happy to review it with you and trim it down or add to it as you see fit for your operation and your goals, if it's something that you want to implement there. Okay, so let's stop sharing this screen. We'll go back to the other one. I gotta click that button first, and then we go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, back on the PowerPoint. Yes, we are. Okay, so let's see here. Does Redox offer a another question here? Does Redox offer a fertilization plan if I go with your program? Yes. So yeah, we do consulting. We'll work with you and your ag retailer to help come up with a plan that meets your goals. So absolutely. And what are the yields at Pine Tree Ranch? Tim, you want to take that one?
I will have to pull up those numbers and find them for the last couple of years. But let's maybe plan to do a From the Grove article or something, and kind of recap what we've done the last couple of years, and we can include all the yield data. And
that'd be good. Yeah, the hard thing at Pine Tree is that it's got so many weird things going on, right?
Yeah.
So there's no real normal block.
Yeah, and we do things knowing that they're going to have negative impacts, like severe pruning and thinning out high density plantings and things like that. So but even with that factored in, I mean, we have had very good yields the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that come and see, right? Come walk it, right? Like Tim said, I think that's the best way to assess if you see what you like or not. And I think that this is a great time of year to come because fruit are sized up. You can kind of get a good idea of what's going on when and if it's working or not. Because it's, you come in, I don't know, June, things are picked and it's kind of hard to tell what's going on besides the trees are there and they're blooming. So it's a good time of year. Fall's a good time of year to come see how fertility programs are working or not working. So, okay, cool. So we just went through the whole program and summary. So what do we talked about? So fertilize based on tree phenology, not calendar dates. I think a lot of people fall into that. It's the second week, I see this a lot in purchasing habits, is that it's the first week of the month, it's time to fertilize. And it's like, well, that kind of works, but we also need to make sure that we follow along with what the tree needs and it's not just because it's June 1st that we're doing something. Fertilize to meet the tree's needs during periods of high nutrient demand. Fertilize based on crop load, including inflorescence and young developing fruit, last year's mature fruit, and your goal for next year's crop. So I want to pause here on this one. Avocados are notorious for alternate bearing. A lot of alternate bearing can be taken back to under supporting your high loads and then over supporting your light loads. So let me rephrase that. When you have a huge load on the tree, when I say huge load, that means you have a lot of fruit there, right? So say you have a 20,000 pound crop on your tree. That tree is, and you're running it on let's say a $250 fertility budget, and maybe you only have water and you don't have enough water or something like that. The tree becomes very stressed, right? And it starts scavenging its nutrition out of its leaves, and it starts sacrificing next year's yield for this year's crop, right? So once again, going back to this concept of the tree wants to produce these seeds, the tree will invest more heavily in the seed that is closer to maturity than it will to the seeds that are going to come in a year and a half from this next flower set. So a couple of things there, like we talked about, fertilize the crop you have. Try to keep your tree sufficient, if not in luxury status for during crop load. Pick as early as you can, depending on the market and your size. That will absolutely help set more fruit. If you have low fruit load during bloom, you will have more set. So the best bloom fertilizer is a size pick. Okay. So if the houses are open, the weather's cooperating, and you have big enough fruit, doing a size pick during bloom is phenomenal. For infertility, right? So it's just when you remove that load off the tree, that's just instant energy that tree is going to redirect into the other fruit, as well as you'll get more going back into the flowers. So that's a great way to help mature. Now the problem there is if you did not get your size in summer like you had wanted the previous year, or they didn't size up over winter as you'd like, that's very limiting. So your goal my goal is always to have pickable fruit by Christmas, so that when the house is open and the price is okay, we can go in and capture some early season dollars and get that load off and have a more consistent yield year over year. Okay, so yeah, you do what you're going to do on your picking strategies, but fertilizing for the crop you have is extremely important, and making sure that you have you're looking further down the calendar than just what's my next pick. Use leaf analysis to evaluate the success of your fertilization program and to identify problems. Do not fertilize to replace what a previous crop used. So if you're trying to play catch up, you're way behind the ball. That's a hard place to be, and it can take years to get out of that hole. So that's a very, very challenging to do. So maintain healthy roots for water and nutrient uptake. If you don't have roots, fertilizing is a waste of money. You got to have a root system. So work hard on building a root system. That's why Phytophthora is such a devastating disease. We see small fruit, scant canopies, all these things, because you have no roots. If you have no roots, there's no point in spending money on fertility inputs, because you have no way to bring them into the tree. So it's absolutely important to do that. And then healthy trees deal with stress better. So if you have a healthy tree with a strong root system that's well nourished, you're going to have less fruit drop, you're going to have better size, you're going to have it deal with heat events better, cold events better. All these things the tree is going to tolerate all those stressors better. It feels really good to stand on the berm between your property and your neighbor's property during a heat event and see that all your fruit are still on your trees. Okay, because that's really the final testament to the ranch, is that if you're able to deal with stress events and maintain crop, then that's the goal, right? So if we can grow a strong crop and succeed, even though we have similar climatic conditions, that's totally doable. And a lot of that comes down to watering practices and fertility practices. Okay, so that's that. I don't know why my slides won't advance. Sorry, guys. Let me see if I can reshare this again. And there we go. Okay, we're gonna try and reshare this. Sorry, it paused my PowerPoint here. Okay. All right. So with that, I have some FAQs. You guys are doing awesome. I really appreciate the great questions. One more question here in the chat here. This says, what would be the organic version for avocado and timing? So the organic timings are similar. The product inputs are slightly different. You're going to have a different menu there. A couple of the products we talked about, the mainstay calcium, the H85, those have organic versions, the triplex zinc. But for your potassium inputs, that market looks a little bit different. There's some liquid products that are 321s that are widely used. There's also SOP is widely used for a fertility input for potassium. And then there's a couple other high efficiency potassiums on the market. And then, yeah, nitrogen, you can also use soy nitrogen based products or fish emulsions and things like that that have a higher nitrogen number. So that's pretty much the go-tos for organic. A lot of organic growers still like dry products. I cannot say anything nice about dry spread products in avocados. I'm sure they work to some extent, but I don't see the efficacy of them outpacing the liquid inputs. So I'm a big advocate for liquid inputs, even in organics. The organic market over the past 15 years has blown up with new liquid options, and the ease of use and application cost and the right placement of it outweighs many of the dry products hand over fist. So if you are considering going one way or the other, I guess that's pretty clear which way my opinion is on that. I'm sure that some of those guys at True probably don't agree with me, but that's what I've seen in the field. So okay, so I've got some FAQs. If you guys want to send in some more questions here as I kind of run through these, I think that would be great. Otherwise, I really want to say thank you for tuning in. My contact info is there on the screen. If you want to chat at all about anything we talked about today, get printouts of the trial results that we talked about, or go look at Pine Tree sometime. I live in Fillmore. I live 10 minutes from Pine Tree Ranch, so I'm always happy to go out and walk Pine Tree with people if they wanted to. So and chat about strategies and how some of these strategies might make sense on your property. And yeah, so yeah, I'm gonna run through some FAQs. Thank you so much for participating today. And we got 37 people on here, so thank you. So FAQs, let's see here. Should I cut some water budget to make room for more fertilizer? So I know a lot of people are on a budget, and it's hard to grow. It's hard to invest more in an avocado orchard, especially if you're just skating by on yields. And the answer to this question is absolutely not. Water is your most important input in avocados. And especially if you're in, most of the questions like this come out of the San Diego region where water is extremely expensive. And the fertilization is very unlikely to outpace investment in water. So there's some things we can do within your current fertilizer budget to help increase your efficiency on your water, things like that. But if it's an either or, I sell fertilizer and I will happily tell you not to buy it and buy water, because I'd rather you guys grow more fruit than buy more fertilizer. So the buy more fertilizer will come as long as there's more fruit. Okay, so who sells Redox products? In the coastal avocado growing region, Agrex is our primary avocado distributor. Buttonwillow also sells into avocados. Tritech and Nutrien also have access to Redox products. So ask your rep if you deal with some of those companies, or give me a call if you deal with somebody else, and we can figure out who makes sense for you to talk to. If one of these strategies makes sense, or you wanted help finding a product. How much is this going to cost me? We had a version of this question already about sticker shock on Redox products. And, we do $300 programs, we do $800 programs. So it really comes down to what you want to invest in your crop from a fertility input standpoint. I've had talks with 1,000-acre growers who just don't understand how people don't spend $600 an acre on fertilizer, because it seems to pay off. Every $5 they put in, they get $35 back. So and even at that scale, they're still looking at, okay, well, I did 600 this year, maybe I'll do 700 or 650 on these blocks or something next year, because the return on investment's there. If my size classes are 95%, if I have 95 or 98% number ones and 90% 48s or larger on a 25,000 pound crop, why wouldn't I spend more money on fertilizer if that allowed me to get there? So that's it depends on your system, it depends on your orchard, depends on your finances, but that's how these things are approached. Please go back to the zinc slide. Sure, let's go back to the zinc slide. Thank you for the reminder. Zinc slide. Here we go. So control is blue, and the orange bars are triplex zinc. It says it seems control has more large fruit. So control outpaced it on the 48s, but it also outpaced on the 60s and the smaller size classes. So we ended up with more 48s for the control. Sorry, I can't read these. My windows are on top of them. But we didn't end up, overall, we ended up with better size classes on those higher sizes. Which equaled higher payout.
Yeah, so it looks like what you got there, Danny, was a shift.
Yep.
More of those 48s shifted up to the higher size classes compared to the control.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, and the small fruit stayed small, but the 48s kept going. Yeah, like that. Those 32s right there. There's a lot of pounds right there. So thanks, Logan. How much is it going to cost me? That's nice. It went right to where it was. Okay. Where should I start in assessing my crop fertility strategies? I think a good place to start is to get your tissue test, get your soil test, and your fertility program that you've done for the past year. This is a great time of year to revisit this conversation, and your pack out, because you should be done picking for your 2021 crop, or pretty close, and kind of critically look at all of that and see where you're at. See if it makes sense to reallocate some resources. If you're excessive on nitrogen, maybe some nitrogen dollars need to go into your potassium. Maybe the whole budget needs to go. Maybe you're happy with where you were. Maybe the farm was profitable this year, and some of that profit needs to go back into the trees to help build it for the next year to come. So I think that's kind of the pieces of information that need to be assessed. And I think the goal year over year is to always grow more avocados and grow them more profitably. And part of that strategy does involve your fertility practices. Okay. I'm using KTS and UN32 now. What is the best use of my budget after that? So if you're using KTS and UN32, you're happy with how that's performing. We talked about kind of a couple different strategies today that make sense. Adding zinc to that program has generally paid off well. Adding in a carbon input that has paid off very well also in avocados. So that would be kind of my discussion point, especially at this point in the season, would be, where's your zinc? How's your zinc looking? How's your trees looking? Are you seeing variegated leaves showing up? Are you seeing smaller fruit sizes? Zinc might be extremely useful. Also, H85 could be a very important input for building roots and helping build that. Another thing to look at is salt buildup. If you're in a salty spot, getting those salts out of your system through leaching can be incredibly beneficial. We have several products to help with move salts out of the system. Don't buy gypsum. Call me first and we can talk about that. I don't have time today to talk about why gypsum isn't a great use for leaching in California soil or California coastal waters and soils, but we can talk about that if you really want to at another date. Oh, very, Thank you, Catherine. This is yeah, that's what is the role of water quality in this program? How important is injecting sulfuric acid into the water for pH adjustment to make the product work better? So I'm going to take two parts there. So what is the importance of water quality in this program? Very much. If you have poor water quality and you're building salts in your soil, it's not going to work very well. So salt buildup, in fact, that was one of our issues at Pine Tree when we started, was we had some salt buildup from a poor water source that was really stunting things, and also some poor fertility practices that had been done. When we got the salts out of the system, the trees really started to respond better and take off. So dealing with salt issues in terms of water quality is very important. How important is injecting sulfuric acid into the water for pH adjustment to make the products work better? So there's kind of two parts there. So how important is sulfuric acid injection into the water? Let's start with that. So acid injection into water can be very beneficial to help alleviate bicarbonate problems. Bicarbonate has all kinds of issues in production, not only on physically causing problems in your irrigation system, but also in the soil. When the soils dry out, the bicarbonate will tie up with your zinc and calcium and other things like that and make them less soluble or less available. So what sulfuric acid does is it reacts with that bicarbonate, turns it into carbon dioxide, and you end up just blowing it out of the system. Now, the downside is you're also adding sulfate to your system. So that's something to keep an eye on. Make sure your sulfate doesn't get out of control. If you have very poor water quality and already have high sulfates, that can be a problem. So just that's something that can be a downside. Sulfate is generally thought to move through the system and leach, but in some soils it doesn't. And depending on how much water you have, it might be costly to try and blow it through. So that's a challenge, but generally sulfuric acid can be helpful to increase water quality and irrigation quality of that water. So for pH adjustment to make the products work better, the products are generally pH independent. There's some pH stuff you can play with to increase the handling or improve the handling on some of the products a little bit. But generally they're not relying on soil pH. A good example of this as a comparison would be lime input, so calcium carbonate. In a lot of areas, they apply the bulk of their calcium inputs come out as calcium carbonate, and calcium carbonate requires acid for the calcium to become available. And so applying or having a more acidic soil conditions in those cases will make that product more available. The Redox products work well in pH 7.8 soils just as well they work in 6.5 soils. One thing I do want to add here is that it's very hard to change your soil pH, especially with sulfuric acid injection. So if you have a very sandy soil, you'll have some success for a certain amount of time, maybe a couple of years, and then you run the risk of over acidifying. So just be careful when you're acidifying soils or acidifying your water that you don't go too extreme. And I think it's a fallacy to think you're going to take your soil that's 8 and make it a 6.5. So especially in when we're looking at the soil as a whole. Avocados are nice because you have a root zone that's very high up in the soil profile, so you're able to actually influence that pretty well. But you don't want to over acidify it because that's just as bad. It's actually worse than having a high pH is having an extremely low pH. You'll start roasting off your roots with high pH. So be careful with acid injection, but in terms of fertility inputs and these inputs, it's less important. However, generally having your bicarbonates under control, especially if you're only irrigating every couple of weeks, is a big deal. So absolutely, thank you. That was a good question. I forgot to hit the button again. Okay. We already answered this, right? Okay, and I think what about salts and gypsum? Look at that. That was pretty close. So salts are expensive to have in your soil because they suck your yield out of your trees. They're also expensive. I don't say they're expensive to get rid of, but you will have to do something to get rid of them. You can't just run extra water, especially if your water is extremely expensive. You will have to run extra water, but just doing extra water alone generally does not achieve the goal that you want. Gypsum is a classic calcium sulfate, calcium input. It's calcium sulfate, dihydrate, and it's dry. It comes in 50-pound bags. It has very poor solubility in our waters because our water already has a lot of salts dissolved in it. And we generally do not see the return on investment on gypsum applications that we'd expect in other regions of the United States where gypsum can be more popular and results are seen. So it's still a common recommendation in the marketplace. And I love to have arguments with people about why gypsum's not worth their time or money. So please call me if you want to have that conversation, and I'd love to have it. So how do I get in touch to talk specifics for my ranch or farm? There's my phone number. That's my cell. Give me a ring. I've been getting a couple text messages. So shoot me a text, give me a call, follow me on social media. I post a lot of avocado content because I've spent a lot of time in avocado orchards. So hit me up there at Redox at California Coast there, or shoot me an email. So love to talk avocados. So yeah, feel free. If you have any more questions, I'll hang out here for a couple more minutes. We're a little under our time limit, but I appreciate your guys' time. And that was great questions. I really appreciate the questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Danny. Thanks everyone for attending. Hope you enjoyed this webinar today. And as I mentioned, this was recorded and it will be on the California Avocado Commission YouTube channel. Hopefully by Monday of next week, we'll get that posted. We'll also post on the California Avocado Growers website the handout of the program that we are using at Pine Tree Ranch. And if you have any trouble finding those, we'll have a summary article and links to all of that in the next issue of the Green Sheet email newsletter. So thanks everyone for attending. Hope to be able to see everyone in person again soon.
Thanks, Tim.